Content carried in here is suitable for general family viewing.
Welcome once again. You're with us here on Law Matters, coming straight to you from the Kenyatta University School of Law, based here in Parklands in Nairobi. This is your legal aid clinic on television, where we give you information and instructions and sometimes guidance on how to tackle issues of law that concern you. Remember that we are also on our social media platforms, that is KUTV Kenya on Facebook, KUTV Kenya Live on YouTube, and KUTV Kenya, KUTV_Kenya on Twitter. Tonight, as we continue with our journey on discussing matters of law on our everyday life, we are talking the environment, and particularly we're going to be tackling pollution caused by plastics. And to tell us more about that, we have a special guest who is interested in the environment, and I'll let him introduce to you himself to you so that he can say it best. I'm your host, Dr. Ngugi Kingara. Welcome to the show, Dr.
Thank you very much, yes. Dr. Kingara. Yeah, my name is Dr. Wambua Kituku.
Yes.
I'm an environmental lawyer, but currently I'm also serving as a Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Legal Education. I teach environmental law at the University of Nairobi, and I'm happy to be here. I started my teaching career at Kenyatta University School of Law, so I'm also happy to be part of this show.
Okay, you've come back home.
Yes, yes, literally, yeah.
Yes, so now, maybe for the viewers who doesn't know, the viewer who doesn't know, the legal education, Council of Legal Education, I see it says very well on your card, which is gold type. Mm-hmm. What is the Council of Legal Education all about?
We regulate legal education providers, including universities that offer law programs,
yes,
diploma, undergraduates, postgraduates, but we also administer the Advocates Training Program examination, and that program is currently offered by the Kenya School of Law. So we also manage or regulate that important process. In other words, we are the ones who are responsible for ensuring the transition of lawyers, graduates of law, into advocates, which is the profession of legal practice.
Yes, that is important information for some of our viewers, I think, who are students and who are studying law.
Yes.
They know the right person to see and the body that is going to regulate them very soon.
Right.
So, environmental law, why that? What made you become interested in that area?
Academic interests. My first degree was actually in biology. So I studied the environment as part of biology. But then also I took an interest in human rights.
Okay.
And much of environmental law actually relates to rights, because to protect the environment, you need to safeguard certain rights, including the right to clean and healthy environment and other associated rights.
I see.
So, yeah, there was a confluence of academic as well as personal interest.
Okay, rights. I hear rights. This show we talk a lot about rights in all sectors of society, and today we're talking environment. And one of the emerging areas of concern is plastics.
Yes.
And the pollution that the plastics cause. And there is a law that maybe you'll tell us about that has come up and how it is operating in this country. But just before we go into the nitty-gritties of and the technical aspects of that law, probably maybe give us a background on the plastics pollutions in terms of how now law has come to see it.
Well, yeah, plastic pollution is considered as one of the key global environmental challenges that we are grappling with in the 21st century. And the reason is because plastics now constitute one of the most important pollutants. Initially, when plastics were invented, they were hailed as the most important invention of the 20th century because they made it very cheap to package materials. They also made it very cheap to substitute use of natural resources such as wood. And they also made it cheap to produce in large scale furniture, household utensils. And therefore, it made it cheap for countries to industrialize and promote consumption at a large scale. But then the downside of it was that when you produce plastics, it's difficult for plastics to go away because they are not, unlike natural substances, they are not biodegradable. They cannot be consumed by bacteria. So they never rot away. In the 1970s, the production of plastics was at about 50 million tons. Plastics are light. 1 metric ton is about 1,000 kilograms. Now imagine producing 1,000 kilograms of plastics, then 50 million 50 million times 1,000 kilograms. Now that's substantial. So the production rose from 50 million metric tons in 1970 to about 385 million metric tons in 2017. And all that hardly goes away. The only disposable the only way of disposing plastics is either you burn plastics, and through burning plastics, you release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now that contributes to global warming and therefore climate change. You also produce persistent organic pollutants that lead to air pollution, and that contributes to respiratory diseases for human beings. The other way is to bury plastics. Now that's not.
It doesn't really work, does it?
It doesn't.
Yes.
If you're not able to burn, you leave plastic in the environment, so it gets washed into rivers and it finds its way into our oceans. Now in the oceans, plastics create all sorts of problems. Some of them will dissipate into microplastics, very small, microscopic, not visible to the eye. And they'll be consumed by a small microscopic sea life. Now, as other sea creatures feed on the small microscopic sea creatures, then the bigger ones will start accumulating plastic in their organic tissues and all that. So eventually, when we start consuming those large sea creatures like fish, then those microplastics will end up in our own tissues. So we end up poisoning ourselves without knowing it. Now for the large plastics, the microplastics that end up in oceans, they also create problems for sea life. We've seen cases where some animals get entangled by plastics in the sea. So that leads to death. So there's some sea life is actually threatened by the existence of plastic pollution in our seas. So there's all manner of complications arising from plastic pollution.
So when you describe it like that, so therefore this area fits in very well with what environmental law was designed to do, which is...
Oh yes, environmental law is defined as the rules and norms that regulate how we manage and conserve our environment. So, and we basically conserve the environment through two important processes. One is preventing pollution, And pollution is about producing and living in our environment,
Yes.
Unwanted substances and energies. The other way we conserve our environment is by preventing environmental damage,
Yes.
or damage to the environment. So environmental law comes in to ensure that we regulate pollution, but we also ensure that there is minimal or we avoid environmental damage at all costs. So that's the purpose of environmental law broadly.
Okay, and then in protecting humans and animals, for example, the plastics, which are the direct negative impacts we see plastic cause once they probably, not put in the right place for disposal? What are some of the health hazards directly that the common person should know? Actually, this is happening to you, even though you may not know about it.
First is a risk to life. Yeah, as I said, plastics are not biodegradable, so they persist in our environment.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen in dump sites cows eating plastics.
Yes, at least that one is common. But
yes.
yeah.
Eventually, the cows will develop abdominal complications, and that will lead to death. Not now, but in the long term.
In the long term.
So in that sense, plastics can threaten life. I also talked about a process where small plastic particles, the microplastics, are consumed by small creatures. Small creatures are consumed by large creatures. So eventually, you find in the large creatures, plastics are prevalent in their tissues. Now, those can lead to disorders like cancer, which eventually leads to death. So plastics have endangered about 80 known species, animal species in the seas.
Yes.
And of course, they pose significant risks to not just sea life, but also terrestrial life, including humans.
And then there are also other legal plastics that have been applied to products we use every day that cause harm. Can you mention some of these so that the viewer can hear? Probably tonight they might be using that product and it has plastics and causes harm.
Yes, as I mentioned, the plastics that we use for packaging materials, if you subject that plastic to high temperatures, it will release chemicals known as dioxins.
Yes.
Now, dioxins have been associated with medical complications like cancer.
Yes.
So every time you burn a plastic, every time you use a plastic for microwave purposes,
Yes.
know that you're exposing yourself to dioxins, and those are pretty toxic in the long term.
Hot soup in a plastic cup?
In a sense, it could be if that is sustained for a very long time.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I read somewhere that toothpaste contains plastics, micro granules of plastics that are used to clean our teeth. Is that true?
It's actually the action of brushing your teeth using a toothbrush, because the brushes themselves, many of them are made out of plastic. So that act alone of brushing the teeth, rubbing your teeth with, will produce microplastics, and in the long run, this could affect your health.
Yes.
If it leads to the processes that I talked about, bioaccumulation. The small plastics end up in tissues and accumulate for a long time. That could present challenges to us.
We are not to brush his teeth.
Yeah.
but I think these are dangers that we should be cognizant about, because some of them might be, obviously harmless, and in the long run, something happens to your body.
Right.
I think before we jump into the legal technical aspects of environmental law, what would be your advice on now how to deal with these problems of plastic pollution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. One is to minimize and, if possible, avoid production of plastics. I think there are some unnecessary plastics that we produce for packaging, when we know very well that we have credible alternatives in the form of natural products. Yeah, the bags.
Yes.
In Kenya, we banned the use of plastic carrier bags. I mean, that has not in any way stopped purchase of goods from supermarkets or from shops. No, not in any way. But we've innovated. We've come up with alternatives to that. So what the ban taught us is that it's possible to avoid the use of plastics. So I think the first step is to see how best can we avoid production and use of certain plastics.
Yes.
It has been estimated that if we were to reduce production of plastics by about 55% by the year, say, 2040, we would save this planet about $50 billion. Now that can make a big difference for even a country like Kenya.
Yes.
So there is need, therefore, for governments to encourage their citizens not to use plastics if they don't have to.
Yes.
The second strategy is to reuse plastics.
Yes.
And I think some people promote the reuse of plastic containers.
Yes.
Yeah. As packaging materials. Some have also encouraged us to reuse plastic utensils, even though I don't know whether it's possible to clean them hard enough to avoid diseases and things like that. So reusing is important. Then recycling.
Recycling,
yeah. And recycling can actually contribute to job creation. We've seen in this country people making use of plastic to produce plastic poles for fencing.
I think is an innovative idea.
Yes, and that also goes to conserve trees, because you won't have to cut trees to make fencing materials. Some people have built houses using plastic materials, build ships, boats using plastic materials. So it's possible, even clothing. It's possible to come up with, to produce garments using plastic. So it's for us to innovate and ask ourselves, how can we, because plastics won't go away if we don't dispose them, so how can we convert them into utilizable materials?
Very, very.
Then ultimately, if we are not able to recycle, then we'll have to dispose.
Yes.
Some countries have come up with a way of burning plastics to generate energy.
Yes.
Yeah. So. And plastics are good in that respect.
So we've heard important to do something about the pollution by doing positive things with what we do with plastics. And if we can't be able to do that by ourselves, law will come in and make us do it the right way. So that marks the end of our first segment. We will be right back. Stay tuned and keep interacting with us on our social media platforms.
You guys attended the NDC, the UDA NDC the other day, and I'll bring up an issue here of Moses Kuria saying that walimuibia Rais Uhuru Kenyatta kura hadi akaingia kwenye kiti. And Moses Kuria defends himself by saying that he was supposed to talk about kuimbia.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
You see, for the case of Moses Kuria, we have this accent, the African accent.
hata katika ulimwengu wa binadamu utapata kwamba wanadamu wako katika tabaka mbalimbali. Kuna wale ambao kwamba wao wako katika daraja za juu, kuna wengine wako katika daraja za katikati, na vile vile kuna wengine ambao kwamba wako katika daraja ya chini. Basi vile vile katika ulimwengu wa malaika, Mwenyezi Mungu aliyetukuka amewapangilia katika daraja tofauti tofauti. Kwa hivyo lazima tujue daraja zao. Je, ni nani kiongozi wa malaika wote na alikuwa akifanya kazi gani?
Ukiwa na dukuduku la michezo, tunafungua sanduku la dukuduku kwa ufahamu zaidi. Kila danadana, mitimko, mifiatuko na harakati zote ugani, sisi ni wako mwandani. Kukurukakara zote nyanjani haziwezi kuangaziwa zaidi ya micharazo michezoni. Mimi mwanaspoti wako matata Peter Pinches Mwaora ndakuwa na jopo lenye maarifa sufufu, nikufahamishe na nikuburudishe wewe shabiki shakiki kwa uhakiki na kindakindaki.
Welcome back, viewer. Now, Kenyatta University School of Law has a mandate of community service and research and education, and we've been doing this kind of work through the legal aid clinic based here in Parklands. And now we are coming to you with the same service on television through our Law Matters program. We are back with our expert on environment law, Dr. Kituku. And we were talking about things that we need to do to be able to use plastics positively without having to use them to pollute the environment, because sometimes the direct actions we do actually cause direct pollution. Right. So what is the legal framework in this country like concerning plastics pollution?
Okay. Well, we have the Constitution as our supreme law, which all other laws in this country must conform to the Constitution.
Right.
So the Constitution creates a right to clean and healthy environment. So that right also forms a good basis to hold the government and the private sector and even citizens to account if they undertake any polluting activities, including production and indiscriminate disposal of plastics. The Constitution also imposes an obligation on the government to protect the environment.
Yes.
That's Article 69. And therefore, the government is required to come up with systems of pollution control. The government is also supposed to come up with systems of monitoring the environment to identify risks. So all these risks we've talked about on pollution, the government ought to identify those risks and come up with systems of addressing those risks. So the Constitution also imposes on the national government. Remember, our Constitution creates a devolved system of government.
Yes.
So the national government has a responsibility for developing environmental policy, whereas the county governments have a responsibility for pollution control. So actually, much of what is required to be done on controlling plastics will fall on the responsibilities of county governments. Yeah, but for the national government, because they have the responsibility for national policy, that's why we have the National Environmental Management Authority, established as a national agency for controlling the environment. And therefore, they have a mandate to ensure we control the use of plastics, at least at a national level.
Yeah. Within their task, they work within an act that is supposed to maybe dictate how they should do their functions.
Right. Now, that is the second tier of our legal framework. We have national laws, but I also wish to remind you that our constitution now requires that any international law that Kenya has ratified becomes part and parcel of our law.
Okay.
And therefore we have international treaties that Kenya is signatory to and has ratified that have a role to play in regulation of plastics. We have the Basel Convention that regulates hazardous wastes, and under that convention, aspects of plastics have been designated as hazardous wastes and therefore fall under the control of the Basel Treaty. We also have the Stockholm Convention that looks at persistent pollutants.
Yes.
And as I said, if you ban plastics, you release those persistent organic pollutants that pollute our environment. In Africa, we have the Bamako Convention that also regulates hazardous import and export of hazardous waste. And you may have read in newspapers that some countries, the rich industrialized countries, have actually been dumping plastic waste in African countries. So that is a legal framework we can rely on to prevent the dumping of those waste in our countries.
So I guess the viewer who is in business should think that I'll be paid a bit of money and then attract that waste and dump it on my lot.
Yes, but well, the long-term effects of dumping are deleterious to our environment. And by the way, dumping is big business. Japan, for a long time, was exporting their plastic waste to China.
Yes.
When they got into some diplomatic differences, China refused to accept plastic waste from Japan.
Yeah.
And within a week, the impact was felt. Japan is a small island country. They didn't know where to dump their plastic waste, so plastic became visible
Everywhere.
in the areas. So it's a big issue. It's at a global level, it's also a big issue.
Yes.
And I'm happy that the United Nations Environmental Assembly recently meeting here in Nairobi agreed to come up with a treaty, a global treaty that will regulate plastic pollution at a global scale. So that's a very important development, and we should take pride that the decision was made here in Nairobi.
In Nairobi, yes. And that's where we're coming to you from.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, now at national level, we have the statutes and laws that have been enacted by Parliament. The Environmental Management and Coordination Act is one of those laws that also has a role to play in regulation of plastics. And under that act, NEMA has developed regulations on plastic control of plastics.
Yes.
Even though the regulations have not been adopted, within the Environmental Management Coordination Act, we normally call it EMCA. The Cabinet Secretary for Environment is mandated to issue regulations. And so the regulation that banned the use of plastic carrier bags, the light bags here in Kenya, was issued under that provision in EMCA. So that's at the national level. Now at the county level, counties are now empowered to pass laws to help them control pollution. Now a couple of counties have actually passed those laws. Here in Nairobi, if you don't know, the Nairobi city government has now, in 2016, enacted the Nairobi City County Waste Management Act, which also has provisions that, if implemented, they can help in addressing the plastic pollution menace in this county.
Which is that other county? That, if you know, they should be feeling proud. They're trying to come up with good laws, so to speak.
Mombasa, Kisii, Kajiado, even Kiambu. Machakos has a waste law, but it focuses more on electronic waste. So counties have tried their best to innovate legal solutions to waste problem, and that should be encouraged and supported.
Quite positive. Now, NEMA now, we know that body is the one now charged with making sure that the environment is not polluted and things that are pollutants don't harm us. What is their way of carrying out their duty?
Okay. By the way, NEMA has a very broad mandate, which if utilized effectively,
Yes.
can help us resolve most of our environmental problems.
Yes.
One, they have a mandate on research, so they should be able to help government identify risks to our environment. And as I've said, plastics pose one of the gravest risks to a healthy and clean environment in this
Yes.
country. Secondly, they have a mandate to sensitize citizens on how to conserve, protect, manage the environment. So by educating people on the need to, for instance, avoid the use of plastics,
Yes.
that should also have the long-term effect on reducing the production of plastics,
Yes.
if we can avoid it. NEMA also has a mandate to enforce regulations.
Yes.
So the ban on plastic carrier bags was enforced by NEMA diligently.
Yes.
I understand in the year the ban came into effect, that particular year, there were over 900 arrests conducted by NEMA officers in this country.
Okay, yes.
So, and that had a positive effect. We reduced substantially the use of plastics by about 80%. So that's commendable. So what we need to do now is to move to the next set of plastics that are deemed polluting, like single-use plastics, those that are used as utensils. So that should be the next frontier. Increase the weight of the bags that should not be used in this country. If we consistently and persistently move in that direction, I'm sure we will eliminate the use of the most polluting plastics in this country.
Yeah, and also on the enforcement side of things, I mean, because sometimes you see, obviously, mountains of pollutants.
Right.
And even a common citizen who doesn't have to do any research can see it is right there.
Yes.
And probably, are these challenges of enforcement such as that NEMA can't go after the person who is supposed to make sure that doesn't happen?
Enforcement of environmental law has its own challenges. One is that the most polluting actors in our society happen to be the richest.
Yes.
The industries,
Yes.
they are owned by extremely rich people.
Yes.
So going after them can be problematic
Yes.
for an agency like NEMA, which, as we understand also from reports, NEMA is not well funded. They don't get sufficient budgetary allocation to discharge their work. So if you have such an agency dealing with the extremely wealthy in our society, then it becomes difficult to enforce environmental law.
Yeah. Are there other regulatory bodies that should work with NEMA or have been instituted to work with NEMA or on their own to regulate?
On the issue of plastics, yes, we have the Kenya Bureau of Standards.
Okay.
It has a mandate to certify products that can be produced in this country or imported into this country.
Yes.
Now, KEBS, as it is commonly known, can play a very important role in minimizing environmental pollution in this country.
Yes.
But I'm not sure whether they look at it that way. If, for instance, they declare that certain plastics should not be imported, that's it.
Yeah.
Nobody can
Bring in a product
yes.
that has that.
Yes. If they also decide that certain ingredients that are necessary for production of plastics should not be imported,
Yes.
that's it. Now, unfortunately, we've not used the mandate of KEBS in a manner that should advance environmental protection goals. Rather, we look at KEBS as an agency that should principally drive economic development and not environmental protection. So we need that integrated thinking in government to help us achieve environmental protection goals through agencies that, if you look at them, do not seem to have a role to play in the other agencies. The other agencies we need also to pay attention to county governments. As I said, they have a mandate to control pollution. Some counties have established laws to control pollution. They have environmental departments for that purpose. But again, the challenges that bog our counties invariably end up constraining the environmental departments to discharge their mandates. And that's something that needs to be resolved also. Yeah.
Okay. Specifically on the ban on plastic bags, what is your rating on the performance of the law that was instituted in curbing the pollution that came by that, the use of those bags?
I think our law has performed very well, and in two aspects. One, law plays a role in educating people from the simple maxim that ignorance of the law is no defense.
No defense, yes.
Yeah, so once government has enacted a law, citizens have a responsibility to know that law, to learn that law.
Yes.
Otherwise, when they are arrested for violating that law, they can't say, we didn't know, right?
Know, yeah.
So that alone communicates to citizens that certain things will not be acceptable.
Yes.
Buying, producing, using those carrier bags is not acceptable. So that awareness was very important. Then secondly, the enforcement of the law itself also did a good thing, and it was effective. As I said, the consumption went as low as 80%. Now, unfortunately, law is not effective everywhere. So there are parts of this country where the law doesn't thrive as much. Informal settlements, the rural hinterland. So you still find the use of those burnt plastics in those areas. That shows that even though we succeeded in banning those plastics, we also drove underground the production of. So there's a thriving black market for those kind of plastics. So that's the next frontier probably. That's where we need also to focus on. And that's why empowerment of counties is extremely important, because it is counties that will have the capacity of reaching the informal settlements, reaching the rural hinterland where national law is not effective.
Okay, now for those viewers who haven't been gotten by the law and have been, contravening it, what type of penalties should they know they expect if they were caught?
The law prescribes fines, so that's one important sanction. The fact that you'll get arrested for carrying the banned plastics means that you spend time in jail. It will inconvenience your life. So that in itself is also a penalty. I mean, it's a sanction that is worse enough.
Yes.
For industries that produce those plastics without a license, there's also a penalty for, and the nature of environmental law now is such that it also apportions individual responsibility to companies, to whoever is running a company.
Okay.
So you cannot hide behind the fact that company is a person,
a thing,
artificial, an artificial person. Yeah. Those who run the company, those who exercise control over the company will also be liable for some of these offenses.
Okay, so you can't say because I'm working as a CEO in a company, it's the company, not me.
We will find that company, but we'll also go for you as a CEO of that company and jail you.
Okay, now you know. And I hear that NEMA actually is authorized to come into your car, your house, to check to see whether you're using these materials that are forbidden.
Yes. NEMA is empowered to employ inspectors, environmental inspectors, who can access public-private premises, but that has to be done in accordance with the law. And they're also empowered through the police to effect arrests.
Yes.
And now NEMA is working closely with county governments to ensure, and also the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions, to ensure that environmental crimes and offenses are prosecuted effectively at the local level. Yeah. So
I wish they just find that guy who's usually in front of me when I'm driving in the street, who throws the cup out of the vehicle.
Yes.
You know, those people throwing bottles out of the vehicle.
Right.
Yes.
But though enforcing environmental law through arrests, fining, penalizing people is not the most efficient and optimal way, because it costs money employing the inspectors. It costs money getting the police to arrest people. It costs money actually to jail people to keep them in prisons. Yeah. So the most effective way probably is through sensitization, educating our communities. And I'm happy that CBC has a focus on environmental awareness. Our education system now is training our young children at an early stage. So that's something that needs to be encouraged. I'm happy that Kenyatta University, through this program, is also raising awareness, sensitizing our communities. So this is something that has to be sustained. In the long term, empowering communities with knowledge will be more effective in ensuring that communities are able to deal with the environmental problems, rather than the use of big sticks.
Beating people up.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think we've heard it, and it's just very informative, and we will know that we need to take care of our own environment ourselves and not wait for the law to come and get us in jail so that we stop doing it.
Right.
That marks the end of our second segment. We'll come back to answer your questions that you may have. Keep sending them on our social media platforms, and we'll be happy to respond to them. Stay tuned.
Kenya kuna aina tofauti za hali ya anga ambazo huboresha au kuwa changamoto kwa wakazi wa eneo. Kaunti ya Makueni imeibuka kuwa bora katika masuala ya kilimo licha ya hali ya kiangazi.
Maembe huwa tunazalisha nyingi, lakini mtambo kuna ile capacity ambapo haiwezi pitisha na hatuwezi chukua maembe yote. In fact tunakuta tunachukua 5-6%.
Kaunti hii imejikakamua kwa udi na uvumba kutegua kitendawili. Ukambani kuna ukame.
Tambo maji ilikuwa ngumu kupata kiasi, kwa sababu kama ni pale kwa mto inapita tu inaenda. Lakini sasa hii kama imesimamishwa itakuwa rahisi kwetu.
Basi kikosi cha Boresha Kilimo kilitangamana na wakulima mbalimbali kuandaa Makueni County Edition.
Na wahimiza wana Makueni na Wakenya wote kwa jumla kuitazama kipindi cha Boresha Kilimo kila Jumamosi kuanzia saa 6:30.
KUTV, in conjunction with Kenyatta University Funeral Home, is now offering death announcements immediately following our news bulletins at 7 p.m. At this sorrowful time, as you share in your grief, allow us to communicate your announcement of your loved one on KUTV in both Kiswahili and English. For more details, kindly inquire at the KU Funeral Home Service Desk or call 0736 928 380 or dial 020 359 9054.
Welcome back. Yes, so much information there, useful information on plastic pollution, usefulness of plastics, but at the same time, we can go overboard and become pollutants ourselves. So this is a segment we get to handle the questions that our viewer asks so that they get more information on that. And I think I have one question myself, because as we wound up, I just got to thinking, because of something you mentioned about those who trade with plastics. We do know that those in the business of plastics are big investors, and big business as in industry is involved in this. So is it realistic to think that we can phase out most of the plastics that we use and then probably render these big financial muscle people, not with a thing to do, so to speak?
Okay. Well, plastics, the plastic industry has its origins in the oil industry, because plastics are produced out of petrochemicals. So for as long as the oil industry thrives, so you can be sure that the plastic industry will also thrive.
No, I'm worried because we're just about to discover oil.
Yeah, that is good news, at least from an economic point of view.
Yes.
But also from an environmental point of view, we need to be even more cautious. So then, I was personally surprised. I traveled to Dubai early this year, and I was shocked to see the use of the plastic bags that we banned here in Kenya years ago. And I would imagine, Dubai is more advanced, than our country, but they still use those plastic bags. So the only logical explanation to that is because plastic industry is closely linked to the oil industry, and that region has thrived on the oil industry. So it is in their interest to sustain the plastic industry for as long as they can. But I'm happy that the world is starting to witness an energy transition. We are moving away from the polluting fossil fuels as a source of energy to more environmentally safe and friendly energy sources, solar, geothermal, wind, and it is hoped that by the year 2050, that transition might actually be complete. There will be less reliance on fossil fuel, and probably that will also mark the beginning of the end.
Extensive use of plastics.
Okay,
I think that's a good point. So we will be on the lookout to make these good transitions to reduce the reliance on plastic.
Right.
Okay, now we will go to our studio audience with the next question. So over there, kindly.
Good evening.
Yes.
My name is Aloj Phyllis, and my question is, do you think the ban of plastic bags in Kenya has been effective, and if so, why?
Okay, the ban, has it been effective? I think we mentioned something on that, but maybe you can add if there's something we didn't highlight during our discussion.
Yes, the ban has been effective, and there's also empirical evidence to show that.
Yes.
Yeah, the composition of domestic waste that eventually ends up in a Dandora dump site has changed over the last 2, 3, 4 years.
Yes.
There's more of organic and increasingly less of plastics. And also, even, if you walk in rural areas, there was a lot of paper bags floating all over.
Yes, especially those thin ones.
Yes, right.
Colorized ones.
That's right. But increasingly, that is also becoming less visible. So those are empirical evidence to show that probably the ban has taken effect. Statistics also from the National Bureau of Statistics on production of plastics shows that, for the carrier bags, there has been a significant decline.
Okay.
But then the use of plastic still remains pervasive because there are other types of plastics that remain in use.
Yes.
As utensils, as furniture. Look at this.
The pens.
The pen, yeah.
Yes.
So and for some time, it will be inevitable to continue using plastics until, as I said, we sort out our energy issues and less reliance on oil at a global scale.
You got your answer there then. Next question from the studio audience. Go on.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Ayumba, and my question is, are plastics totally dispensable? I mean, can we do without them totally?
I think you just highlighted that one.
Yeah, but just to emphasize that before plastics there was life.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. And as communities we thrived.
Yes.
So it's also possible to envisage a future without plastics.
Yes.
And as I've said, once the energy transition is complete, once we start using more environmentally friendly sources of energy, we'll definitely start rethinking about the necessity of plastics in our lives.
And sometimes it's the availability of the thing that makes you think that you need only that thing to do what you need to do to enhance your life, but it's not always true.
Yeah, well, there is availability, but there's also the mindset.
Yes.
If we think that plastics are important in our lives, we'll value them.
Yes.
But the moment we think otherwise, we'll cherish. I mean, countries that have banned the use of plastic bags, like Rwanda. I mean, people thrive,
live, and they shop and they do all kinds of things.
Life continues.
Life continues.
Right.
So, one more question from the studio audience. Okay.
Okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Nyabuto Samuel Misiania, first year law student from Kenyatta University School of Law, Parklands. So I'm well informed in 2017 that the government banned both the use, buying, and importation of plastic bags due to the haphazard and cattywampus ways that citizens were handling and disposing plastic bags. So I know one of the core principles of a good and reasonable person is critical and creative thinking. So my question is it sustainable to use plastics to make utilizable materials as a method of managing plastic pollution?
Well, that's a question from a fairly learned person.
And he loves to promote his school.
Yes.
Which is a good thing. So how do you handle this?
No. It's possible to promote a thriving recycling industry that is anchored on plastic waste.
Yes.
I mean, we've seen very credible enterprises established to recycle plastic waste. And the only missing link is the lack of incentives for those industries. And I'll give you an example. I did research on waste here in Nairobi.
Yes.
And I was shocked to learn that the county government actually taxes industries that try to recycle plastics waste generated as byproducts in the industrial processes, because the county government considers those byproducts as raw materials, and therefore they should be taxed. So if such taxes are eliminated, then it will become possible. It will incentivize industries to make use of plastics as raw materials for producing goods and services. So that's one area that we need to look at. How do we incentivize? We have funds that have been established to promote businesses. So if those certain funds within those learning institutions can be earmarked to promote small enterprises by youth, women that focus on plastic recycling, that can also promote.
So this fund is only for people who are using plastic as raw material to create new products that are
and eliminate interest.
Friendly.
That could actually help in a big way, in a very big way.
All right, I think our learned friend upcoming has been answered. Okay, one final question over there in the back, please.
So my name is Charlene Joy. My
Okay.
question is, if I buy bread that is wrapped in a plastic paper, then it has been exposed to heat or sunlight, should I be worried?
Okay, I don't know whether you are a chemist or not.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, exposing plastics to high temperatures will releases dioxin, and as I said, dioxin are linked to complications like cancer. So we should worry, but at a low level, probably that might not translate into significant risks.
Yes.
But in the long term, if this persists for a long time, it could result in some of those risks. And that's why in environmental law, we have this principle known as precautionary principle, which requires that we take action, even if we don't have scientific evidence to show that certain activity will cause environmental harm. We should take precautions to prohibit that particular activity.
Yes.
So we need to apply that precautionary principle in addressing plastic waste problem.
Yeah, very well said. I think we will leave it there, saying that we want to be proactive, not wait for the environmental law to come and catch us. There are things that we can do to correct this plastic pollution problem, and it begins with you.
The university also.
The university, I think we're using a lot of plastics, so we probably should know how to use them better. Thank you very much, our learned friend from Council of Legal Education, Dr. Kituku. You should feel at home because it's an institution of education, law matters, that is.
Right.
We want to thank everyone who participated in making this show a success, our studio audience, and the crew that makes this show happen every Tuesday. And for the funders who came on board, the Green Grant Fund, and the Kenyatta University School of Law for being our very good partners. I want to say goodbye. I'm your host, Dr. Ngugi Kinyara.
Thank you.
Very well.